Gary here. Welcome to Book Mob. I think it's 24. I've been away for nearly 2 weeks because I was ill with COVID. What a horrible 2 weeks that was. Anyway, now we're back to it and looking forward to bringing you some great reading and writing and books information and stories. And just to add that I'll be speaking to the author Kate Green next week sometime, and hopefully her debut novel's coming out. And I read it during the week, and it was fantastic. So I'll be speaking to Kate Green sometime next week, and I'll hopefully get that up by the end of next week. Anyway, today's episode, I'm going to concentrate on 5 books that I read when I went on long-haul flights. Coming from Sydney, if you want to fly to Europe or the States, there's 15, 17, 20, 23, 24 hours of flying. And even though you've got your movies, you've got music, and I find that if you find a book that really, really engages you, and as in my previous episode, immersive reading, if you can find a book that just completely traps you in its narrative, you will find yourself not even thinking about the time. In that if you can read it straight through, with your breaks for food and stuff and things like that, and you just get so locked into the book that the flight itself, the long-haul flight itself, doesn't seem as staggeringly long and boring and anxious. So today I'm going to talk to you about 5 books briefly. I'll talk about each book briefly. 5 books that I've read on long-haul flights that made my time flying that much easier to endure. All right, so I'll go from the top. All right, this is Andy McNabb, Bravo 20. This is a fantastic memoir or autobiography of an SAS trooper, who takes place in the 1991 Gulf War. And again, the reason it's immersive because it's a brilliant story. It's intense, and you can't put it down because you want to find out how, why, when, what, where, and you kind of see you get a very, very brief but quite clear insight into the world of professional soldiers. And don't forget, this is in Iraq in 1991. I was involved as well not as Bravo 20. I was also in Iraq in 1991, and this took place, I think, before I got there, obviously. And the story is just fascinating how these men were sent behind the lines in order to destroy the Scud missiles that Saddam Hussein at the time was using to fire into, he was just firing them indiscriminately around the Middle East. Anyway, so Andy McNabb, Bravo 20, a very, very intense and totally immersive reading experience, and I couldn't put it down. So this will keep you going at least for a full flight, maybe even depending on how fast you read. But definitely, if you just keep reading this, you won't even know where you're at. By the time you get there, you'll go, oh, that was quick. And which is the reason I'm talking about these 5 books. Now, the next book is, by John Krakauer. It's called Into Thin Air. Now, this was, I think, published in 1997 or 98. Let me just quickly check. Goodness me, hold on. Just bear with me while I look up the proper date because I don't want to give the bad information out. 1997. And this was about the... now, when this came out, 1996 was a terrible expedition on Everest where quite a few people died. And John Krakauer is he's an adventurer, he's an author. He actually wrote another fascinating book called Into the Wild, which I think was made into a movie a couple of years ago. But this book, again, it's about personal experiences. It's about people's lives. when you read it, you're fascinated by the facts. You're fascinated by the narrative, and again, because it's a story that pulls on the human heartstrings about life and death, and people trying to, they want to achieve something that somehow in our culture, you've got to climb this mountain and tick it off the box. I mean, I personally. I'm not enthralled by people who climb Mount Everest just because it's there, so to speak. I mean, it is a elitist sport that requires a lot of money, and I think most of the criticism post into thin air is that the wrong type of people are paying huge amounts of money to be carried over the finish line, and that's kind of where the book goes. But really, it's a really visceral story about people's experiences. And again, I couldn't put it down because it is so fascinating to read about people who have a dream, who have a goal, who have a mindset. And when they're faced with the freezing cold, they're faced with the requirements, the fitness requirements. I think it's like reality smacks you in the face, because we all imagine, the romance, like being a soldier or a climber. The romance of it is so strong, but the actual reality is pretty much banal. And if you don't take each step, and if you don't look after yourself, you are going to die. And a lot of people died making this Mount Everest ascent and descent in 1996. So a fascinating read, well written. John Krakauer's written a few books, like I said, Into the Wild. And he knows how to capture the reader's imagination. So, good one. Another book which I found, which you would, originally when I picked this book up, I knew nothing about it. The Poet and the Murderer. A true story of verse, violence, and the art of forgery. Now, I've actually developed quite a fascination for forgery. I've been watching documentaries, looking up on YouTube for famous forgers. I find the whole idea of forgery so fascinating, because what are we doing? Obviously, at the bottom of it, it's always people who find a market, and in this case, it's what's the poet? Emily Dickinson letters, and this guy, what's his name? Mark Hoffman. He gets heavy into selling, poems and lost letters, and the intricacy, the amount of effort this guy goes to in order to dupe buyers is just incredible. I mean, it takes a great deal of skill and artistry to produce the items that this man sold, for hundreds of thousands of dollars over years, and the story of how he commits and how he's fully immersed in history, in time. The man has an understanding of what other people are just searching for in their own sort of obsessions with writers, with artists, with religious leaders. So this man just understood, okay, I'm going to invent, I'm going to create the world that these people are looking for. I mean, he creates forgeries, but he's basically summing up the world for people's worldview. Oh, this is a letter. This is what I thought. And he does it superbly well. However, it all turns to hell, and there's a murder, and, desperate people do desperate things. But again, another massively engaging and real intense insight into the mind of a forger, of a master forger, and the way he goes about it. I mean, you learn a few things about forgery, but what I'm saying is that in order to pursue this bloke's sort of career, you've got to be a genius. I mean, the handwriting, the ink, the paper, the attitude, where you found it, the provenance, all this stuff is this guy just manipulates people's own fantasies and wishes, and he creates the space where his forgeries are real, so to speak. So this is a fascinating book, very well written, and a fun read. A great insight into the mind of a sociopathic forger. Now, The next book is, and I actually bought this in London, I think in 1990. When was this? I think I bought this. I visited London in 1997, and this book has also been made into a movie. The Diving Bell and the Butterfly, Jean-Dominique Bauby. Now, this book, look, you can read it, and that again, I'm choosing these 5 books because of their length, their brevity, and the fact that it's an engaging story. So that when you sit down on the flight, once all the bull is taken care of, you can sit down and just get stuck into a book, and you lose time. You don't, because you're so immersed into the story, into the narrative, into the memoir, into the biography, you cannot wait to get going. So The Diving Bell and the Butterfly is a story about a magazine editor, fashion magazine editor, who suffers from a brain injury and ends up being locked in gets a system called locked-in syndrome, where he cannot function physically, but his mind is acutely aware of the world around him. And slowly in the book, it describes how he starts to communicate with people by flicking his eyelids, and he builds up this, relationship. And he, basically, he wrote this book. And the film of this story was quite well made, but the actual book itself, I mean, you're talking from a man who, this book is written by the patient, by the man stuck and locked in his own body. And it is fascinating, again, to see how he, overcomes this death sentence, and how he tries to crawl back some of his dignity, some of his humanity, and you literally cannot put it down. And it's you could probably read this in 2 or 3 hours, and really enjoy it though. And again, it's one of those books that, like I said, you get on a plane, you sit down, you've got 14 hours to go, bang, you lose in 3 hours, and you don't even know it's passing. So great book, The Diving Bell and the Butterfly. Read it before watching the movie, and a beautiful book. And I remember I read it. I mean, I think I finished it in 2.5 hours or something like that on my flight back home to Sydney. Now, the final book is from 1987. 1986. It's called Adrift, 76 Days Lost at Sea by Stephen Callahan. Now, there's, again, this is 1986, all right? So when I picked this book up, this is the first paperback edition. When I picked up this book, there was no internet. There was no even rare documentaries. Nowadays you've got, all those documentaries, How I Survived and blah, blah, blah. But again, this story is written as a diary, a day-to-day existence, as this bloke lived for 3 months. For I think 76 days, something like that. But 76 days lost at sea, yeah, as it says in the title of the book. But this bloke, goes from his sailing vessel, gets sunk or whatever. He gets into his rescue raft, and it's all his struggles and his challenges. But again, it's about how this guy lives in this moment. And it sort of reminded me of the scent, even though the film, what's it called, with Tom Hanks, about the guy living on the island, whatever, after the plane crash. But this one is real. I mean, this is a guy who had to adapt or die. And he had the sense he had a lot of sailing experience, but he also had the sense that when things become overwhelming, when the world looks to you and says you don't have a chance, when you read this book, you suddenly realize the 1% is basically all you've got to hold on to at one point. Like everything was coming down for this guy, and if he didn't do the next thing, he would be dead. So he just did one thing that gave him another 1%. He did another thing that gave him 2%, that gave him 3%. You know what I mean? So he built on his tragedy because he had a will to live, and at the end of the day, I guess the difference between I'm not counting myself as one of these people. At the end of the day, when the world falls around you and you are left struggling with a choice, do you go on or do you give up? Well, by reading this book, you'll see that this sailor turned around and said, you know what, I'm going to give everything I've got. I've got a 5% chance, I've got a 2% chance, but if I don't take that 2% or 5%, well, I'm going to be lost. So I have no choice if I want to keep going. And it's a great read because it's tough to go through every single day, and you just cannot wait to get to the day, the moment that he's rescued, how he's rescued, the misrescues, how people boat past him and didn't see him. It's so frustrating, and you get mad. You almost think that he's not going to make it. And the reason I'm saying he's going to make it is, well, you wrote the book. But what I'm telling you is that it's another great book where you will sit on a plane on a 14, 15, 17, 20-hour flight. You can get through, I would say, 2 of these books that I've offered you today as a way to fly away your imagination, to stop looking at that big plane on that little map and enjoy reading, get an immersive reading experience. You're trapped in a plane. Forego the movies, forego everything else that can distract you, because these books will capture your imagination 100%. So here they are again. It's Adrift, The Diving Bell and the Butterfly, The Poet and the Murderer, Into Thin Air, and Bravo to Zero. So those are 5 books that I recommend if you're going, and they're all, I think they're all available. You just go to the bookshop, and I'm sure you'll find them. And I recommend, if you're going on a long-haul flight, you need 2 things to keep you going. Surely out of those 5 books, you'll find something that will just pass the time for you in the most relaxing manner. All right, and before I go, I'll tell you what I'm going to be reading in the next 2 weeks. Okay, this is the Booker 2023 International Booker Prize winner, Time Shelter. A good friend of mine recommended Martin Amis, Time's Arrow. He just passed away, Martin Amis. This book apparently is written backwards, and it deals with the Holocaust. And apparently it's a tough read, so I'm looking forward to it. Yellow Face by Rebecca Kung, and I've heard a lot about this book, and I'm really intrigued to read about it. It's about someone who writes a book and dies, and then someone else pretends to have written the book that person who died wrote. So it sounds really, really intriguing. And finally, The Librarianess by Patrick DeWitt. And this guy, I love the way he writes. He's got this great sense of time and the great sense of narrative. And when I read it, I laugh all the time because he has such a great way of seeing the world in a very tragic and amusing manner. So that's it for Book Mob for episode 24, I think. And don't forget, next week I'll be speaking with Kate Green. And hopefully you guys will stay tuned and have a great reading week. And remember, read, pick up books, pick up those 5 books, read them on your next long trip. I'm sure it'll make you feel good. Bye.